Hello friends, this is Growl. In this video, I'm going to teach you everything you need to know to play Disc Priest in 9.1 Mythic Plus. This video is going to cover my choices and why I do what I do, but it'll also cover a lot of stuff I've learned playing Priest over Shadowlands Season 1. In this way, I hope it'll be helpful to those who are just picking up the spec for the first time, but also people who are returning to the game who are just trying to figure out what's going on with the patch. Disc Priest is definitely a really unique healer in Mythic Plus, although it's always been kind of behind other healers. With the addition of the new Kyrian Lego, a lot of people are thinking that Disc Priest might actually be able to compete for the top spot. And before I start with the guide, I just want to say that I make tons of other videos for all other healers. I also stream High Keys and Mythic Raid, so be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and go follow my Twitch. Links for all of my stuff, as well as my weak auras and my UI frames and stuff, will be in the description of the video. So let's get started. 9.1 only saw a couple changes for Disc, but those changes are pretty big. The first one is the Spirit Shell nerf. This is not something we care about too much in Mythic Plus. It may affect your raiding, however, I still think Disc Priest will be very, very good in raid. The most important changes, though, are the new Kyrian Legendary, Sphere's Harmony. Previously, Disc Priest did not really have a good Lego, and you're essentially just only using a free power infusion Lego. But now with this, you'll be able to reduce the cooldown of your Boon of the Ascended by a lot, as well as there's no Prideful. Prideful was a really big challenge for Disc Priest, and although you could heal it, the Season 1 affix really sort of like felt locked into you needed to save big cooldowns and you needed to be ready every single time. So Boon of the Ascended specifically was a cooldown that you wanted to use on Pride every time, and you ended up holding it and not being able to use it on Trash to help out with healing or just to do DPS. But now, in combination with being able to reduce the cooldown of your Boon of the Ascended and not needing to hold it for Pride, I think Disc Priest's damage and overall ability to heal in keys is actually going to shoot up. Will it be able to overtake top healers like Shaman or Paladin? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. For race, I prefer Goblin on my Priest. I like having the mobility of the Goblin jump just to move around quickly. And for Horde, or for Alliance rather, I would just play Night Elf. Shadow Meld is really good, especially as a Disc Priest. You can drop out of combat and get mana. For stats, I'm really not sure about this. The traditional stats for Disc Priest are prioritizing haste and then having a secondary of either verse or crit. Both are roughly equal. For high keys, I kind of prefer verse, and for lower keys, probably crit. It doesn't really matter too much, though. At some point, though, you may find that you run out of mana. You'll see my Priest is mostly just in Season 1 gear. I also have some kind of weird enchants from doing other stuff. I could probably get to 35-40% haste even, and at some point, you may feel like you're really, really running out of mana all the time. If you feel like that's the case, you may try and lean off the gas just a little bit with the haste and more heavy towards crit or verse, just in order to make your heals feel a bit more potent and not as, not needing to spam all your spells to get good use out of it. That being said, having really high haste feels great for Disc Priest. Not only is it helping your Shadow Word Pain, it's letting you get more stuff into your Boon of the Ascended, it's letting you just weave in more DPS and healing, so overall haste is still a really, really good stat for Disc Priest. As for trinkets, I think a go-to is definitely going to be Changeling. I think I've included this trinket on every single healer guide, but Changeling is just a really, really good stat stick. If you can ever get one of these at high item level, you should take it when possible. For your second trinket, I think you are probably going to want to have an on-use for your Boon of the Ascended. You'll see I was lucky enough to get an IQD out of my weekly chest on my first week, and this is one that I'll hopefully be able to use with maybe every other boon, just to kind of have like a stronger one. You can use this to get even more haste or verse during your Boon of the Ascended. Other options, if you can't get a hold of an IQD, are the Ruby from Theater of Pain. This one might be a bit clunky because of its 2-minute cooldown. You might, you'll only be able to use this on every other boon, depending on how much you can reset it. Another option is Badge from PvP. This one has its item level nerfed a little bit in PvE, but it's still a really great trinket, and if you're a PvPer and you have one of these, you may as well use it, since you can pair this up with every single boon. Another option I'm not sure about, I haven't mentioned it on any other healers, but the Tuft. This is a Season 1 raid trinket. Absolutely not necessary if you don't have this already, but if you do, it's a really nice single target healing trinket, and sometimes Disc Priest can struggle with extended single target healing. So this is one that, you know, if you have it, it's probably good to use for now, although keep in mind this will pretty dramatically reduce your damage compared to the new season trinkets. For enchants, all standard stuff: bracers, running plus 15 intellect, weapon, celestial guidance. I like stamina and avoidance on my cloak. Leech is fine too. For chest, I think you should probably run 30 stamina, but I have the 6% mana one from raid. And for rings and gems, again, probably prioritize haste. You can see I have mastery on there for whatever reason, but probably prioritize haste, and then eventually you may want to start getting verse if you feel like your haste is way too high. For consumables, you have your Spectral Flask of Power, your Shadow Core Oil. For food, you can use the Crown Roast or the, you know, basically any food. It doesn't really matter too much. You have your Augment Runes if you're really trying to go hard. For potions, I'm not sure. Previously, I used Phantom Fire, but you may consider wanting to use an Intellect Pot with your boon. Also, I generally don't really use pots that often. I generally like to have a mana pot or an invis pot on hand as a priest just in case, because, well, those emergencies come up quite a bit. So we'll talk about Legendary. I already mentioned how powerful the Kyrian Legendary is. Unfortunately, I've been working a lot on my Paladin lately, so my priest is just slightly behind on Renown. I haven't had a chance to farm it up to 48 yet and get it. It was unlocked this week, so we'll have to default to the dungeon journal. Sphere's Harmony is great for reducing the cooldown of your Boon of the Ascended. None of the other priest legendaries are really that strong or worth talking about that much. Obviously, you'll use one if you'll have one, but the go-to is definitely Sphere's Harmony, and we'll talk about the boon rotation and what to do later. If you're not Kyrian, let's say you're playing Venthyr for PvP, or you just want to play another Covenant, the option is probably Twins of the Sun Priestess. This means that when you use PI on an ally, you also get the benefit of it. This is not too useful in other forms of combat, or other forms of content rather, so it's not super bad if you decide that you want to play a PvP Lego or anything else like that. I know some people like the Penitent one as well. This is just like a set and forget, slightly increases your throughput, but doesn't really do that much. Generally with Legos, I try and find something that's a little bit fun. I don't like using basic, like, passive Legos, but I know some people, are still getting the hang of things and they just want something a bit more simple with theirs. So as for Covenant, you'll see that I am Kyrian and recommending the Kyrian Lego. I think Kyrian is going to be quite a bit better from the other Covenants in Mythic Plus. In a lot of other guides, I mentioned some healers have 2 options, 3 options even. I think Disc is probably the most narrow in scope, in that you'll definitely notice an increase if you are Kyrian versus the other Covenants. For Soulbinds, again, I don't have it quite unlocked yet, but once you, while you're leveling up, you want to use Pelagos. Pelagos just gives you a nice mastery buff, and right away at the beginning of the tree. Mastery while it isn't a great stat, it gives you a lot of healing during your boon, which is nice. However, once you hit Renown 57, you unlock this very last trait in the Mechanicos Soulbind. This reduces the cooldown of your Boon of the Ascended even more when you hit enemies with it. So once you hit level 57, you want to switch over to Mechanicos, go all the way down the left probably with all the potency slots. Maybe in some dungeons you might prefer the Haste Hammer and only 2 potencies, but I'd probably be running 3. For potency conduits that are worth talking about, Courageous Ascension, by far the best one. We're totally building around our Boon of the Ascended here, so increasing the damage of the Ascended Blast is going to be really powerful. Shining Radiance is also very strong. Disc Priest actually has a lot of good potency conduits, which is why we probably want to get 3. If I had to pick 3, I'd probably say Courageous Ascension, Shining Radiance, and Swift Penitence. A 4th close one is your the Rabid Shadows. Even though it's a Shadow Priest conduit, you can still use this and it's still pretty good. I haven't mathed out. In Season 1 I was testing, and this one was comparable to the other ones. I think it's a good idea maybe to try both, or to see how much damage your Shadow Fiend is doing. The one thing that's annoying about Rabid Shadows is that sometimes with a pet it can be buggy and it's a little bit less reliable, whereas Shining Radiance and Swift Penitence are always going to be useful. As for Finesse and Endurance, I really like Power Unto Others. This reduces the cooldown of your PI. This allows you to use it more on your team. As a Disc Priest, using PI in your team is going to be the best benefit you can get. If you can do damage even somewhat close to the other healers while keeping them up and giving, a mage or whoever PI, you're going to be a very valuable asset to your team. For Endurance Conduits, I think Translucent Image is really strong. This gives you a little bit of DR on yourself every time you press Fade, and it's on a very short cooldown. It can be hard to get in this habit of just like mashing Fade all the time when you're ever going to take damage, but it definitely adds up over time. Charitable Soul is also nice. This gives you a lot of shield when you're using Rapture. This counts towards your, your giant Rapture shields, and if you're using Rapture to AoE heal, you can kind of not really even shield yourself and just shield your teammates, and this Charitable Soul shield will keep building up on yourself. As for talents, I'm kind of on the fence with talent builds too. So all the way through Season 1 I used Twist of Fate, but I'm thinking with the boon build you may want to use Schism. Schism is a little bit clunky in Mythic Plus because you have to cast it every single time you want to use it, whereas Twist of Fate is a nice passive. However, Schism is going to really increase your damage with Boon of the Ascended, and because the cooldown of Boon is going to be so short, being able to Schism every single boon is actually going to be pretty valuable. Schism also pairs well with your other abilities if you just want to throw out a Mind Blast and a Penance and all that. So I think I would probably try and make Schism work. If you're feeling like this is clunky or you're struggling a little bit, you can always switch over to Twist of Fate. Twist of Fate, the more difficult the content you're doing, the better it is. That's because, you may not have time for the global to press Schism, and also it'll proc more often. Second row, I'm always choosing Feather. Third row, I'm kind of on the fence here too. Technically, Solace is slightly better in terms of damage and mana spent. However, I kind of like Mindbender just for its flexibility. I think depending on your preferences, you can go either here. I prefer to use Mindbender and then just use Mindbender on cooldown. Sometimes I find that when I'm playing Solace, I tend to hold onto my Shadow Fiend because it's a 3-minute cooldown and I kind of worry that I'm not going to have it when I need it. However, Mindbender, it's just like I can just fire it every minute and it'll be up very shortly. For the fourth row, I like Shining Force. Almost always taking this. This row, I'm almost always taking Sins of the Many. Sometimes during like Grievous Week, I'll take Shadow Covenant, but realistically, on Grievous Week, you should probably just play Holy. In this row, I'm always taking Purge the Wicked, really good on AoE. Almost always, very useful on trash packs, gives you a free Shadow Word Pain on like every single trash pack. And in the last row, I'm always taking Lenience. Now we'll talk about rotation. Disc Priest rotation, although it might be a bit overwhelming, is actually kind of simple. So the first thing that you need to get used to doing is placing atonements on party members. With my UI, I have this green circle here just to be that different from all my other stuff, just to really focus on atonements and get used to using atonements. And to apply atonements, you have 3 different ways to do it. Your default way should be Shadow Mend and Mythic Plus. You shouldn't be atoning people that are full health. That's generally what Power Word Shield is for. And you shouldn't be just using Radiance unless there's group damage. So for single target atonements, we're pressing Shadow Mend. If we need to apply Atonement or AoE heal everybody, we're pressing Radiance. And let's say you need to apply Atonement while you're moving. Let's say, you're dodging out of a swirly, but your tank is in trouble. You can press Power Word Shield, but you should generally use Power Word Shield pretty sparingly unless you are in Rapture. Then, once your atonements are out, you want to use your big DPS abilities. You want to ideally have Purge the Wicked on the target. You can press Schism, and then use your DPS abilities like Mind Blast, Penance, Solace, if talented. Notice I didn't mention Smite. One important thing is that Smite is not a heal. Don't put atonements on people and press Smite and expect it to do healing. Think of Smite as a filler. So let's say you use your DPS abilities and they still need healing, right? You use your Mind Blast, use your Penance, that's when you use Shadow Mend. Smite is not a substitute if people are in danger. You always need to use Shadow Mend on people when they're in danger. Then when your smaller abilities come up, then, you know, you can get some more atonements out. You can Schism, Mind Blast, Penance, and then... So if you sort of get the idea, you're using short bursts of your DPS abilities with atonements to heal, and then in between you're using Shadow Mend or Radiance. A couple notes about atonements. Shadow Word Death does not contribute to atonement healing at all, so as tempting as a button it is to press, it doesn't help with your healing. It's still just fine to press this button. If they're low health, it's a great execute button. I'm not saying don't press it, just know that it doesn't contribute to atonement healing. Another thing is that with your AoE abilities, only the first target hit counts. So for instance, Mind Seer, if you're Mind Searing a pack of 20 mobs, this isn't doing insane amounts of healing. It's doing very little healing only off of the first mob. Again, Mind Seer is still a great button to press on AoE, so don't worry about, you know, if there's a lot of targets and you want to press that Mind Seer, definitely do it. Just don't do it when your team is in danger. And the last AoE ability that you want to consider is actually your Ascended Nova, the Ascended Nova and the Ascended Eruption from the boon. Keep in mind that if you hit 20 guys with that, that's only healing from the first target. Again, you still want to hit a bunch of guys with it. I'm just saying that, you know, keep in mind to manage your expectations that on a big pull, you're not doing tons of like massive AoE healing. So a really big part of Disc Priest gameplay is using your cooldowns. Why Disc Priest is considered a difficult healer is because you can't necessarily just go from pack to pack only using really basic rotational abilities like Shadow Mend and Penance to heal, because not only you'll run out of mana if you're spamming Shadow Mend, but also it just doesn't do enough effective healing, and you need to use your cooldowns to counteract damage. Pretty much all of Disc Priest's cooldowns are preemptive. Yes, you can use, you know, Rapture or your Ascended boon in an emergency to help people, but ideally we'd always like to know the damage that's coming and predict it ahead of time. So a good go-to right away is Rapture. Rapture is a minute-and-a-half cooldown, and it gives us huge power word shields. It's a very flexible spell because you basically just press it and then you can just spam power word shield on whoever is in danger, whether it's spreading them all out on your party, using them on one person, you know, using them on the tank if the tank is getting beat up and they don't have any big defensives. So Rapture is generally my first line of defense, and Mindbender as well. Mindbender and Rapture kind of tend to pair well with each other for really high amounts of damage, because when you're pressing Rapture and you're spamming your shields, your DPS kind of stops, right? You only have your dots out, but Mindbender ensures that there's a little bit of DPS going out while you're using those shields, helping top everyone while you're, you know, slamming the Raptures out. Then if you don't have Rapture, you have your Pain Suppression and your Barrier. For single target damage, use Pain Suppression. For group damage, use Barrier. Again, I'm usually using Rapture as my go-to first, and then if I don't have one of those, I'll use my Pain Sup or my Barrier. All three of these abilities actually can be used on a tank if they're in trouble, so keep that in mind. Don't be afraid to just drop a dome on the tank. There's no, you know, a tank is never going to be like, oh, look at this dumb Disc Priest using dome on me or whatever, but a tank is definitely going to be feeling it if you're not using any of your defensives on them. You know, rotating Pain Sup, Barrier, Rapture on the tank, you might feel like Disc Priest isn't that good of a tank healer, but using your big cooldowns, it's actually very strong. And last, I want to talk about the boon rotation as well, because it's a little bit complex. I'm going to talk about it as if we were using Schism, and if you're not using Schism, well, then you just press Ascended Nova instead. So the goal during boon is we want to have atonements out, we want to have Schism on the target, ideally, and also our dots are Purge the Wicked out. So what we're going to do is we're going to refresh our dot. We're going to use Radiance to apply atonements to everyone in our party. Again, this is optional. It's only if you need the healing, but usually it's a good thing to do because we don't want to stop in the middle of our boon to heal. So we're going to reapply our dot. We're going to press Radiance. Then we're going to start our boon and use our first blast. The Ascended Blast is the most important part of the Nova, or the... What is it? Ascended boon? Sorry, all the names are similar and they're confusing. Ascended Blast is the most important part of the Kyrian Covenant ability, let's say that, and you want to be using that on cooldown. And then in between, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to apply Schism first at the beginning. At the end, if we still feel like we're going to need healing, we're going to apply Radiance again to our party, although again, not necessary. And if we don't need to do either of those things, we're just going to be pressing Nova. So in practice, it looks like this. Use Shadow Word Pain, use your boon, blast, Schism, blast, Nova, and then blast again, Nova, blast, Nova, and then if I wasn't talking, I would be able to get one more blast at the very end there. Now you can also see why haste can help a little bit. Now your GCDs with your blast and your Nova are a little bit funky. They don't work the same way as your other abilities, and it may feel weird at first, but something to consider. Also remember that, you know, it takes a little bit of practice and you want to be able to autopilot this. So I'd highly recommend, if this stuff is kind of confusing to you and you don't really understand what's going on, just come up here, go hit a target dummy, practice it, and get used to the rotation and figure out exactly how you should do it. That way, when you're in a key and you're like, oh no, you know, because it can be a little bit overwhelming to just be slamming DPS buttons when your party's in danger. There's also a really good site. I'm not going to show it on here, but it is it's in the Focused Will Discord. If you're not a part of the Discipline Priest Discord, I would highly recommend that. You can do a little ramp simulator. This is much more for Raid than it is for Mythic Plus, but check that out if you're like really trying to hammer out exactly what your ramp should be. And last, I want to talk about utility. Disc Priest utility has roughly the same utility as Holy Priest, so if you watch that guide, it's going to be very similar, but a lot of stuff is still very, very important to use. First of all, we have Psychic Scream. Psychic Scream is sort of like our default AoE stop. If we ever have mobs near us or a group of mobs and we need to stop their casts or their abilities, Scream is really, really strong for that. Don't be afraid to just use Scream on mobs. If they're in combat and your teammates are DPSing them, the fear is going to get broken instantly, so don't worry about a mob like running away or anything like that. If you pull threat and there's a bunch of mobs towards you and you fear them, that's a lot riskier because you have threat on them, no one's hitting them, and they may just get feared off into the distance. But for mobs that are in a pack that your team is blasting on, don't worry about pressing Scream. PI, Power Infusion, is going to be your most important cooldown that you use as a priest. Your team will hopefully love you with good use of it. I would highly recommend tracking cooldowns of your party members on either your party frames or on the side of your party frames with OmniCD. That way you can see when their cooldowns are up. You can use PI on them. I would say while you're learning, you're still getting used to things. Don't worry so much about being perfect with your PIs and landing at all their cooldowns. One thing that I like to do is just pay attention to how everyone's doing in the meters. A lot of times in pugs especially, there may be one or two good players and some not so good players, and don't worry so much about PIing whatever class needs haste the most. Just PI whoever you think the best player is, because chances are they'll be able to do more. They'll be able to do more with the PI even with a class that uses haste better. And if you're not sure cooldowns, don't be afraid to just send it. Don't be afraid to just send PI on cooldown, 20 seconds every less than 2 minutes is still great. Mind Soothe is really nice. I don't know if I can Mind Soothe anything in here, but Mind Soothe is great for skipping mobs and just for overall like reducing the chance that you pull something. Anytime there's a situation where there's a patrol or you need to sneak by mobs, always throw in that Mind Soothe. Even if it isn't necessary, even if you don't 100% need to Mind Soothe it to get by, you may as well Mind Soothe just to reduce the chance that your monkey team slips into it. Don't forget also that you have Mass Dispel. You can remove either enemy buffs or debuffs on your party, as well as, I think it's called Dispel Magic, a single target Dispel as well. Life Grip is also a very fun ability. Again, I can't really show it in the Kyrian Hall right now, but Life Grip is a very, very useful ability. It has a pretty long cooldown, and it can be a little bit jarring when you get gripped, so be careful not to just use this too much. However, as you get more and more experience, Disc Priest is all about anticipating the damage coming out and being aware of the battlefield and seeing what's going on. So as you get more experience, you'll start to see situations where your teammate is standing in bad and they're about to die, and you can just kind of yoink them out of there. And lastly, there's Shining Force. This is talented, but I usually almost always recommend talenting this. This knocks mobs away from you. Remember, you can use it on allies as well. If, you know, if your tank is running away and they need room to kite and they can't get away, you can use Shining Force off the tank. Again, be careful with Shining Force. It's pretty disruptive in that it knocks mobs everywhere. You know, it can pull stuff. It can just spread out packs. So you want to use this sparingly, but at the same time, it's still a very good tool. I would say the easiest and most common way to use Shining Force is just on a single mob. You know, let's say there's a couple mobs here on the tank and then there's one ranged mob. Just standing here and using Shining Force on yourself to knock the ranged mob in to help your DPS cleave. You know, a lot of people ask about healer DPS. How do I do more DPS? And I usually say, well, you should worry about things that help your team's DPS more than yours. And this is an example of one where, let's say your team is just cleaving on 2 mobs. Knocking this 3rd mob in could increase everyone on your team's DPS by, you know, 30% or maybe a little bit less, but you get the idea, right? And nothing you can do, like spamming smite or doing whatever, is going to do more than bumping this guy in and increasing your team's damage by 30%. So while I say concentrate on things that help your team's DPS, that's sort of an example of one of them. So that wraps up everything. That was a little longer than I expected, and it also didn't cover almost, you know, there's still some stuff. Disc Priest is a very complex class, and there's a lot going on with it. You know, you could spend a lot of time figuring out the exact Boon of the Ascended rotation. You could spend a lot of time discussing all the talents, but hopefully this is at least an intro primer to Disc Priest. And I hope to do more either video reviews of other players playing Disc Priest, or if Disc Priest happens to take over and the Kyrian Lego is the new juice, then we'll be doing some high keys and streaming some high keys on Disc Priest later in the season. So again, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, go follow my Twitch. Thanks for watching. I hope you guys have wonderful Disc Priest adventures, and happy keying.